Good afternoon, and welcome to our second Know Your Rights During ICE Encounters event. And before we get started, I'd like us to take a moment of silence for Renee Good, Alex Preddy, and others that were lost. Yeah, thank you. And it's good to see your smiling faces today. Sorry for the delay. We were having some technical difficulties connecting our program to the screen behind us. So we're going to go ahead and go forward today and do a verbal presentation. My name is Terry Sloan. I'm the City of Albuquerque's Intergovernmental Tribal Liaison. And it is an honor for me to speak to you today from the traditional unceded homelands of the Southern Tewa Pueblo people, who are the caretakers and nurturers of this sacred land since time immemorial. Now I'd like to also introduce our esteemed colleague from the Navajo Nation Human Rights Commission, Ms. Darlene Omokil. She is the interim director of the Navajo Nation Human Rights Commission.
Good afternoon, Yate. Terry said my name. I'm Darlene Omokil. I'm a policy analyst with the Navajo Nation Human Rights Commission. Yate kidini dole. Saya Shaya Maideshkish Dinanishton, Ado Tutsoni Bashichin, Kanavani Gashichedo, Twitchini Gashinalende, Twittis Wheatfields for Yelo Aya, Adoshton. Ako yeah, she not Sonahano, Yahagi, Ado, that he sought Sagi. I want to thank everyone for joining us today and for listening to us. I want to especially thank the City of Albuquerque for hosting this, especially Terry here, who reached out to our office to say, hey, Navajo Nation Human Rights Commission, let's do a Know Your Rights seminar again. Because we're here. And as just very briefly, as Native Americans, as the first Americans, this type of gathering is so important, where we educate ourselves and educate each other. I view this gathering as another way of strengthening our shield. Our shield that we all have, and us natives, all of us New Mexico natives, all over throughout the country, you know what I'm talking about. The shield that we have, and I say that because we know that knowledge is power, right? That's how I view this event. I'm very thankful for everybody's participation in this, and we have representatives from the Navajo Nation here. Other than my office, the Navajo Nation Human Rights Office, we do have a table out in the lobby. We have our Senior Public Information Officer, Tiffany, here, another policy analyst, Shania, and we have a human rights investigator, Brandon is also out there. We have representation from the Navajo Nation Vital Statistics and Identification. Mr. Ron Duncan, who leads that office, will be presenting later this afternoon. He's here with his staff, and they're also out in the lobby. Auto Operation Rainbow Bridge, Miss Sanopsa Jim. I always say her name wrong, and I apologize. Her team is here to also provide information. So thank you again.
Yeah, Darlene. Next, I'd like to move to the mayor's video. Mayor is going to provide us a welcoming and a land acknowledgement.
Knowing your rights is critical for all of us, and especially during these tough times. We know that the targeting that's happening by the federal government and ICE is literally attacking people of dark skin. And unfortunately, that of course includes our Native American community. So we're explaining today everyone's rights, but in this case, especially tailoring it to folks in the Native American community. I hope you know that Albuquerque has, of course, a long, more recently cooperative history with our tribes around us, that we respect sovereignty, that we have a government-to-government relationship with the tribes around us. And most importantly, at a high level, we're committed to civil rights for all of us, but especially during these times, people of color, and in this case, especially the Native American community, which is being unfairly profiled by ICE. So our team is going to walk through the details on this, but know that we're committed to be there for you, to help with education, and also to make sure that in Albuquerque, everyone knows, but you also know, that we do not in any way cooperate with ICE. That's against both our city ordinance. It's also against my executive order. It also means that we don't track information. So we will never share your information with ICE, whether it's from a license plate reader or whether it's from an interview with APD. And in part, that's because we also don't save those things. So by law, we don't actually retain any information about citizenship. And so whether you are a citizen or you're not. And so know that at least in Albuquerque, we're doing all we can to defend our city and to defend you and make sure that we protect your civil rights.
So our next presenter for today will be, he's an honor to present with us today. His name is Preston Sanchez. He's an attorney with the ACLU of New Mexico. And at last year's event, he did a wonderful job at presenting our rights and issues during ICE encounters. So, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. Yate. Se llama. Sí. Buenas tardes. Afternoon, everybody. To all my friends who are here with us in person and to those who are tuning in virtually, please, we see the comments that are coming in. If you can't hear us, let us know so that we can make sure that you can. Okay. So sorry about the technical difficulties that we're going through. Hopefully it'll get resolved here in a second. I'm gonna turn that, there you go. Turn that one off. So again, my name is Preston Sanchez. I'm an attorney with the ACLU of New Mexico. In a second, I'll give my colleague here, a special guest, a chance to introduce herself. I'm James in Laguna Pueblos. I'm also Diné, born and raised here in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I've been practicing attorney for the last 13 years or so. One of my favorite specialties is coming and speaking to folks about what their rights are during police encounters, during encounters with law enforcement. So this is a timely conversation or discussion to have. And I think what we want to try to do today is to present to you all some, sort of big information. What are your rights? How do you deal with police officers? How do you deal with ICE agents? What to expect? What is going on right now out in the world? What are the concerns and fears that you all have, and how do we address those concerns and fears using the information and knowledge about your rights and how to deal with those encounters? So we want to make it very practical so that it's something that you can take home, share with your family, share with people that are traveling to and from the reservation and other destinations. We want to make sure, our goal at the end of the day is just to make sure that folks are able to travel safely, get home safely, and not have to worry about these encounters with ICE enforcement. Is there an echo? There you go. Okay. So many of you, and we don't have the slides here to show, but many of you have seen most recently in the news a bunch of different headlines that are causing fear amongst our folks. For example, I'll read off a couple. Tribal nations urge citizens to carry ID as ICE raids increase. Navajo Nation leaders raise alarm over reports of indigenous people being questioned and detained during immigration sweeps. Trump immigration raids snag U.S. citizens, including Native Americans, raising racial profiling fears. Now, you might have thought that you just turned on the news and heard me read from yesterday's news, but these are news headlines from a year ago. Nothing has really changed, as you may have noticed. And so we're here to talk to you about those issues and concerns that are ongoing. And our goal today, as I mentioned earlier, we have two goals. We want to address your concerns about encounters with ICE officers off tribal lands, off reservation lands. And we want to empower you with knowledge about your individual rights and showing you how to deal with ICE encounters. And the reason why we chose off-reservation, off-tribal lands is because right now, as far as I know, and you might correct me if I'm wrong, but everything that we've heard in terms of ICE having any sort of presence on tribal lands has so far just been a rumor. We haven't heard any actual substantial information to confirm that ICE has moved into tribal lands, is trying to detain Indigenous people on reservation lands. So what our main focus is here today is to ensure that if you're traveling off reservation, off tribal lands, that you know how to deal with ICE agents, ICE, and law enforcement, generally speaking. And so we want to talk to you about what those rights are under the Fourth Amendment, under the Fifth Amendment. And then, as I mentioned earlier, my colleague here has some very special information to share with you about what do you do if you're a bystander watching something happening and you want to help. You want to do something, but maybe you don't know exactly what you can do. Well, there's rules, there's things you should know, but there's also ways in which you can help, in which you can offer assistance, in which you can record, you can document the information, and you can provide that information to somebody who can use that information to help those who are getting caught up in these raids, okay? So it's not only to protect your individual rights, I want to show you how to do that, how to assert your rights, but also what to do if somebody else is caught up in this scenario and how do you help them, okay? So before I go any further, I want to give Emma a chance to introduce herself, but also she's going to explain to you who are ICE, who is ICE, who is Immigration Customs Enforcement, who else are enforcing immigration laws in New Mexico, and and what do they look like? How do we know who they are? And so real quick, I'm going to turn it over to Emma, and she's going to talk to you about that for a second.
Hi. Can you guys hear me? Can you hear me? No? Yes?
Nope.
No? No, not at all? Not even a little? Okay. So I'm running the PowerPoint slides. All right. How's that? Is that any better? Any better?
Just talk really loud. Use your voice.
Just holler? Okay. All right. Is that any better? All right. Hi, my name is Emma O'Sullivan. I'm an attorney with the ACLU. I've been an immigration lawyer for 10 years, and that's my background and my specialty. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. And yeah, like Preston says, we're just hoping to provide you guys with the information you need to know to protect your rights and your loved ones when you're interacting with ICE. I wish you guys could see our PowerPoint slides. They're really great. Everyone on Zoom is going to see them though, so hopefully you'll have access to them at some point in time. So as a quick rundown of what is it that we're dealing with? What is ICE? What is ICE enforcement? So ICE is the kind of police agency under the Department of Homeland Security. It's a federal agency. It's not investigating crimes like the FBI does. They're investigating civil immigration law. They have a few bureaus underneath the umbrella of ICE. They have what's called ERO, the Enforcement and Removal Operations. They also have HSI, which is Homeland Security Investigations. Those are all just kind of different chunks of ICE. You also might see them now under this administration collaborating with Customs and Border Protection, which is a separate agency together underneath the Department of Homeland Security. That might be another agency that's doing ICE immigration enforcement in the United States. And they're being deployed all over the country, not just in the border zone. So that's important to know that you might see Border Patrol working in, we've been seeing them in the news, like in Minnesota, for example, other places where they're being deployed in these big operations. Local law enforcement also can be deputized to work with ICE and to do ICE enforcement under what's called 287G agreements. We just outlawed those in New Mexico this legislative session, so you shouldn't see that happening in New Mexico. It is important to know, though, that they are common in other parts of the country, and they are legal in Arizona. And there are tribal entities that enter into 287G agreements also. So if you're operating on tribal lands, that's important information to know is, do they have that kind of agreement to do ICE enforcement? So that's important to know. Why might ICE officers or Border Patrol or others who are enforcing immigration laws, why might they pull somebody over who's a Native American citizen? 1 in 5 ICE arrests now since the Inauguration Day has been due to blatant racial profiling. So that's something that I don't have to give you guys a big speech about racial profiling, but that's a big trend that we've seen a huge increase in super blatant, no warrant, no criminal history, no immigration history. That's something that's happening pretty commonly and increasing under this administration. They also have routine checkpoints throughout the country. There's Border Patrol checkpoints in the 100-mile border zone. Sometimes they also get set up in the interior for different reasons. There's also things like workplace raids. Okay. Good. Okay, stop hollering. Okay, so yeah, so we're excited to use this another thing that might happen if immigration is investigating a particular employer or they're looking for a particular person at their job site. That's something that happens. And then warrantless arrests are increasing just in the community at large too. So that's something that we've seen increase under this administration. So what are they trying to find out? What information are they seeking? If ICE stop somebody, they're trying to figure out if they can remove you from the country, in a nutshell. If you're a U.S. citizen, they cannot remove you from the country. You cannot be deported if you're a U.S. citizen, and that's, if you take nothing else away from this presentation today, that should be, ICE doesn't want you. They want to be finding somebody that they can remove from the country. And that could be somebody who's undocumented, it could be somebody who has a green card, who committed an offense that would make them deportable, like a major crime. But U.S. citizens are never deportable, so that's important information to know. How do you identify ICE? Well, it's harder and harder these days, isn't it? They don't tend to wear standardized uniforms. Often they wear something that says police in big letters and ICE in tiny letters. They don't tend to wear, standardized clothes. You kind of see in the news coverage the sort of outfits that they're wearing. But you can always ask somebody like what agency they're with, so that's important. Go ahead. Move us to the next slide. Oh, sorry.
Right, so I think Emma makes a great point. If there's anything I'll take away, or if there's anything to take away today, is
citizen or to determine if you're removable. And so today, this whole presentation was called upon by our friends at the Navajo Nation Human Rights Commission, along with a bunch of other relatives and allies who really want to ensure that Indigenous people understand how to understand what's going on and how to utilize your rights to address the concerns that you may have, the fears that you may have about being stopped by ICE agents, right? But what you should know is that as a US citizen, you are not removable from this country. So I hope that alleviates some concerns, some fears right off the bat. Now, there's also reasons though, beyond just, having, just to know your rights is one thing, but to know how to assert them is equally important in my opinion. And so I want to jump into how do we do that? How do we talk to police officers, law enforcement, ICE agents? How do we ensure that they know that you know your rights? Because it's not enough to just say, I know my rights, and not know exactly how to assert them or when to assert them, okay? So, and it's not enough to just be silent, right? You have a right to remain silent, but it's not enough to just sit back in silence. You actually have to say something to assert your right to remain silent. So why it's important to know your rights, I mean, as we talked about earlier, there's a huge environment right now that we're dealing with where executive orders, mass deportation raids, immigration policies, and profiling practices are happening. And this is affecting tribal communities. And as Emma just stated, your rights as a Native American citizen of the United States, meaning if you're an enrolled member of a tribal nation, a federally recognized tribe, then you are a US citizen. You're a dual citizen, right? You're a citizen to your tribal nation, but you're also a citizen to the United States. And even if you're not an enrolled member, if you were born in the United States, you're a tribal member to a tribal community, you're a US citizen. You cannot be deported. Can the US deport Native American citizens? That's a question. No. Can the US arrest Native American citizens for immigration violations? Emma says no. And the answer is no. Can US immigration agents stop you if you're a Native American person? The answer is yes, right? They can. And that's what they're doing. And it's the color of my skin might be good enough for them to stop me and ask me some questions, right? And that's what we're dealing with. So I want to talk to you a little bit about what your rights are under the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution. And then I want to talk to you a little bit about what your Fifth Amendment rights are under the United States Constitution. So in legalese, or in legal speak, the Fourth Amendment basically secures your right to be free against unreasonable searches and seizures. Like, what does that mean in real world terms? So how do I convey that to my high school nephew, for example, who doesn't maybe understand all the legal technicalities of the Constitution or other laws, right? Well, it basically means that it protects your rights to be free from searches. Oftentimes when police officers or law enforcement pull people over or stop them in the road, they often want to search inside their pockets, they want to search their backpacks, they want to search their vehicles. They may show up to your house and ask you, can we take a look inside? That's a search. That's a request for a search. And under the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution, along with analogous law under state law, state constitutional law, you do not have to consent to that search. And we're here today to tell you and encourage you not to consent to searches. And there's a simple way to say that. Anytime an officer asks you, hey, you don't mind if I take a look inside your car real quick, do you? That doesn't sound like a question, but it is. Oftentimes, officers may make it sound like you don't have a choice. Like, hey, I see your bag, that's your bag, right? You don't mind if I just take a look around, or you don't mind if I take a look inside. If you're that person that's sitting here, ask that question, it may not feel like a question. It may not feel like you have a choice in that scenario. And it's actually really nerve-wracking when an officer does that, right? It's intended to be that way. It's meant to scare you. It's meant to make you comply with those requests. But it's a request. It's a question. So when an officer asks me, for example, Mr. Sanchez, can I search your bags? Can I search your stuff? Can I take a look in your car? The answer is, officer, with all due respect, I don't consent to searches. Simple language, easy to remember, something that you can take home with you today. Officer, with all due respect, I don't consent to searches. And I'll get into another scenario where what happens if they do it anyway, right? We'll get into that, but I want you to remember the language here today. Officer, with all due respect, I don't consent to searches. Moving on to the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution. Fifth Amendment is your right to remain silent. It also is in criminal matters. No person shall be compelled to incriminate him or herself. So how do I assert this right to an officer? Because like I said earlier, it's not enough to just take a vow of silence all of a sudden when they come up to you and just be quiet. That's not what's meant by your right to remain silent. Your right to remain silent means you don't want to answer, you're not going to answer any of their questions. You're not going to talk to them. You're not going to give them any information. How many of you have watched a movie, for example, where a cop is chasing down a robber or somebody, a criminal, right? And we're talking about a movie now. The cop catches the guy, throws him on the ground, starts to put handcuffs on him. What do they say? I think everybody has seen a movie, right, where you know exactly what they say. You're under arrest. What do they say next? If anybody knows it. What else? What do they say after that? Yeah. So you guys are familiar. So they say, you have a right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you. Those are your Miranda rights. They don't say, you have a right to remain silent. Everything you say can and may be used in your favor. It may be used in your defense. We don't know yet. It depends on how positive your statements are. They don't say those things. Can and will be used against you. So that means if you offer information, you're doing so voluntarily. And you're giving them information that if they think it's usable, they will use it against you, okay? And that's why it's so important that we don't answer questions or give information voluntarily unless you want to, unless you're choosing to do so. So, for example, an officer may ask me, Mr. Sanchez, how are you doing today? I'll think about the question, and I'll say, I'm doing okay. I'm doing good. How are you doing? But when it becomes invasive, right, when they start to ask me, well, Mr. Sanchez, where are you coming from? Where are you going? Who's with you? What are your plans for later today? These are all invasive questions. And guess what? I don't have to answer those questions. I can answer the questions that I feel I'm okay with answering, but I never have to answer any question ever that an officer asks me. My lawyer can answer those questions for you. So if an officer ever stopped me and said, hey, where are you headed? You know what I'm going to say, right? And I hope that all of you will know what to say in that situation. And if you choose to say it, you can say, officer, with all due respect, I don't want to answer any of your questions. That's the second nugget that we want you to take home with you. That's the second nugget that we want you to understand and take home to your friends and family, is you never have to talk to law enforcement without your attorney present. And that's the power of the Fifth Amendment. Now, before we get into sort of the more practical ways in which we assert these rights during police encounters, I want to make sure that you all are aware that there are consequences for asserting your rights. And then there are consequences for waiving your rights. This comes down to an individual choice that each of you has. So if I say, officer, with all due respect, I don't want to answer any of your questions, there's a consequence for that. Does anybody have any ideas what the consequence might be? I need you to say it a little louder. Somebody said it. It's okay if you don't want to scream. I'm sorry? Possibly. I think the first thing that happens is you may piss the officer off, right? Somebody's not ready for that. They may not be ready to hear somebody challenge their authority, right? Because like I said, they may ask you a question, but to you it doesn't feel like a question. So when you say it, officer, with all due respect, I don't want to answer any of your questions, it's a little bit of a shocking situation for them. And I've been through this. I am somebody who practices what I preach, and so I've been in a situation with an officer, and he's asked me to give him information. I said, officer, with all due respect, I don't want to answer any of your questions. And guess what happened? He started screaming and yelling, telling me he's going to take me to jail. He's got all this white stuff coming outside of his mouth because he's cussing and yelling at me so much. Again, another fear tactic. I said, okay, officer, I'm not sure what you want from me. And he said, I want you to tell me X, Y, and Z. Give me this information I'm asking for. And I said, officer, again, with all due respect, I don't want to answer any of your questions. And he said, okay, you're going to jail today. But that was another fear tactic. Guess what? I didn't go to jail that day. He let me go. The power of the Fifth Amendment means that you have a right to basically neutralize the imbalance of powers, right? So when you're confronted with an officer and they're telling you, tell me what you know, tell me where you're going, tell me what you're doing, and you feel like the power is imbalanced, right? You're the person that's being accused of a crime or at least suspected of a crime. They have all the authority. Your Fourth and Fifth Amendment rights, they start to neutralize that imbalance of power. That's what we want you guys to know right now. So there are consequences for doing so, though. But there are also consequences of waiving your rights, right? So for example, if I got pulled over and somebody decided, one of the officers asked me if he could search my vehicle. And I said, hey, I got nothing to hide. I got nothing. I didn't do anything wrong. Why don't I just let him search my car? What might be a consequence of that? Usually I do this presentation for high school students and they're like yelling all the answers, so I understand. I'll give you an example. It's an anecdotal example, but it happens. I had a friend who did the same thing. He got pulled over. He was like, okay, it's fine. I'll let him search my vehicle. Well, they took it upon themselves to basically search the inside of the roof of his car. So the inside of the car, they pulled it down, searched around. Didn't find anything, didn't find any illicit substances, any illegal activity. He said, all right, you can go, take off. Well, now he has drapes in his car, compliments of the police department, right? There's other reasons for why you may not want to give up your information. If they ask you questions about where you're coming from, who are you talking to? Hey, what's in your cell phone? Can I take a look inside this thing right here that you have on your lap? Is that information that you really want to just give away? Do you want somebody to see your photos, your videos, your personal belongings, those kinds of things? You have a right to privacy. How you assert your rights and when you assert your rights, that's your power to protect what's private and what matters most to you. So there are consequences for waiving your rights. You may be giving up too much information voluntarily. You may be allowing access to private information and private things that you own. But there's also consequences for asserting your rights, like I said, and it may piss an officer off. It may make them stay a little longer to figure out why you're not complying with their authority. That's okay, as long as you understand that there are consequences then you have the power. So now it boils down to these 4 points. There's more, but I'm going to boil it down into actually 5 points. The first point, this is the hardest one. This is the most difficult rule or tip for dealing with police, law enforcement, ICE agents, anybody who comes to talk to you who has a badge. And that's to be calm, cool, and collected. How many of you have ever been pulled over and you saw those headlights or those flashing lights behind you? Anybody? Okay. What happens? When you see those lights turn on, what happens? You get all scared, right? Your heart comes up through or it goes down into your stomach and you feel like you're ready to throw up, right? It's a nerve-wracking feeling. I feel the same thing. Be calm, cool, collected. And that's why it's important that you know these terms ahead of time. In the event that you're asked questions, you may mumble it a little bit, you may be a little bit out of breath because it's hard to say it in the moment when you're confronted by an officer or law enforcement agent or ICE officer asking you questions, and you may mumble it out, with all due respect, officer, I don't want to answer your questions. But it's because you're aware of it. You've said it enough times in your head, you've said it to yourself, you've said it to your friends, that when that time comes, you're ready to say it. It's a very nerve-wracking situation to be in when you get pulled over, but to be calm, to be cool, and to be collected will go a long way, okay? And that also means being respectful. I always say, officer, with all due respect, how you doing, officer? Anything to sort of let them know that I have nothing against you. I'm not making this a confrontational issue. I am gonna assert my rights positively, competently, but I'm not gonna do anything to offend you, right? I have respect for the officer. To be calm, cool, and collected is to be respectful as well, okay? The second one is to remain silent and avoid invasive questions, okay? So you have to choose what's invasive. It's subjective, it's a subjective tip. So if I asked Emma, how are you doing today? She might say,
Who wants to know?
one way to go about it. Another person might say, I'm doing just fine. How are you doing? Right? Now, if I said, Emma, where are you headed? What are you going to say, Emma?
None of your business.
Another way to say it, I would say, officer, with all due respect, I do not want to answer any of your questions. There's 2 different ways. You just got 2 different versions of how to do that. My version is be calm, cool, collected, but also assert your rights confidently and assertively. So you have a right to remain silent and avoid invasive questions, right? Now, in this particular scenario that we're talking about ICE agents, right? We're talking about what is it they're looking for, and Emma just went through that. We just talked about that a second ago. They want to know if you're a US citizen. They want to know if you're removable. So they want to know, basically, are you here illegally or not? And there's my way of doing things. My practice is I'm kind of strict. I often never give officers any information. I always tell them I don't consent to searches. Go get a warrant. Leave me alone. But I also recognize that many of you are just trying to get to and from your destination. Many of you have grandkids, kids, who you want to see them get home safely from wherever they're going. They might be going to a football game or a basketball game away from home. They might be traveling to a field trip, and they may be encountered with law enforcement, right? And so they can assert their rights to remain silent. They can assert their rights to refuse consent to searches. But they can also say, if they're trying to just get through that interaction, hi, I'm a US citizen. I'm also a citizen of this tribal nation. I don't want to answer any of your questions, and I don't consent to searches. That should be enough information for any law enforcement, particularly ICE, to know that you are not here illegally, that you are a US citizen, that you are not removable, okay? Now we know that that's not always gonna practically work. We've seen what happens in Minnesota, right? But in New Mexico, we have a lot more protections here. We have a lot more, I think, faith in our system and our leaders to know that letting them know that you're a US citizen should be sufficient. Letting them know that that you don't consent to searches and you don't want to answer any of their questions, that those 3 things should start to neutralize that imbalance of power. The fourth rule, go back. The fourth rule or tactic, this is a little trick, but officers can only hold you for so long. They can only detain you temporarily. It's called reasonable suspicion. It's called a Terry stop. It's called a temporary detention, right? So if an officer is looking to determine if somebody committed a crime, they don't know if that person committed a crime or not. Let's just say, for example, they don't know if you're undocumented or not. They may temporarily detain you. They may hold you there for a sec, right? Your car may be parked, you're in your car. They just say, stay here for a second. That's a temporary detainment. If I'm walking on the street and they stop me and they say, okay, stay right there, that's a temporary detainment. If they had any evidence I committed a crime, I'd already be in handcuffs. So if you're not in handcuffs, that means that they're just temporarily detaining you. But they can only hold you so long. They can't hold you there all night. They can't hold you in, terse conditions where, it's cold outside and they just need to know if you're a US citizen or not, right? There's a temporary amount of time in which they can hold you there. And at some point, it's gonna be on you to figure out, has that time expired? So what you can do in that situation, you've already asserted your right to remain silent. You've asserted your right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures by saying, I don't consent to searches. You've already let them know that you're a US citizen. You can ask them, officer, with all due respect, if I'm not being detained, I would like to leave. At that point, they have to let you know, or if you're being detained or not. And if you're not being detained, they have to let you go. And so I've seen this play out on video. I personally have just witnessed it downtown in certain scenarios, but when a person is not being held, is not being arrested or detained, indefinitely, then they can walk away. But you have to ask that question, officer, am I being detained or am I free to go? That's number 4. Number 5, and Emma will get a little bit more into this, a little more depth, but hand me my phone real quick. My phone. This right here is one of the most powerful devices that we have against ICE raids and enforcement of ICE policy, is documenting what's happening around us, okay, and sharing that information. So you have a right to record. And you got to be careful, of course, if you get pulled over, you don't want to be reaching in your pockets for your phone. That could signal a dangerous scenario for an officer who's behind you. If you're stopped and they tell you to stay right there, you want to let them know, officer, I'm going to reach for my phone. It's in my pocket or it's in my purse. I want to record this interaction. I have a right to record this interaction. Okay? Make sure you assert that. Because if I did this, that's not a good look. So record the interaction. Make sure you're a safe distance away if you're looking at a situation that doesn't involve you. Again, Emma's going to get into that, but record with your phone. And if you don't have a phone, or you're out of space, people stop, they run out of space on the phone. You can write things down, take notes, send it to somebody, make sure that somebody else has it. Make sure that you have it. Make sure that it's secure in your phone, that it doesn't get lost somewhere else in the ether, okay? Those are the 5 tips that I have for dealing with police officers, law enforcement, and ICE agents. I'm going to defer the rest of my time to my colleague, Emma, to talk to you about how to be a good legal bystander, be a good witness. How do you do that? How do you make that work without violating any laws or getting caught up yourself, okay? And then we'll take a little bit of time to answer questions thereafter. So thank you for the time.
It was a normal afternoon. Judy and her friend Liz went out for lunch. The two met in elementary school and have been friends ever since. Liz is an American citizen, and while Judy was brought to the U.S. by her parents when she was only 4 years old, she is undocumented. Liz noticed 2 men that seemed to be following them, but she thought nothing of it. That's when the men called out Judy's name as if they were old friends. When she turned, the men approached fast. Judy had just been identified by ICE. ICE stands for Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Stories like this happen every day and are happening now more than ever. ICE approaches people in the street, at work, in their car, or even in court. They often will not be in uniform. It's scary. But remember, we have rights. If you are stopped by authorities and don't know who they are, ask them to identify themselves. Then ask, am I free to go? If they say yes, walk away and do not answer any questions. In Judy's case, the agents told her she was not free to go. If this happens, do not resist or run away, and do not say anything, except I want to use my right to remain silent. I want to speak to a lawyer. Remember, you can ask to speak to a lawyer even if you don't have one. If the agents search your bag or your person, say, I do not agree to this search. They are looking for documents proving your immigration status. Witnesses have the right to film the interaction as long as they do not interrupt the arrest and they are transparent that they are filming. Judy was lucky. Even if you do everything right in a similar scenario, ICE may still arrest you. Another video in this series will help you understand your rights if you are arrested. After the encounter, Judy and Liz took notes about what happened, writing down as many details as they could remember. Be sure that you and your loved ones are prepared for encounters with ICE and that you have a plan for what to do if one of you is arrested, including information about who you should call. If ICE stops you in your community, remember, you have rights. Remain silent. Ask to speak to a lawyer. Say you do not agree to their search. If a loved one is arrested, you should be able to locate them at locator.ice.gov.
different kinds of people. Well, you know, on the ACLU website, ACLU.org, there's a whole library of really great videos that show you just the kind of stuff that Justin was talking about what you can say, what you can do to try and get through your encounters with law enforcement as quickly and as drama-free as possible. So if you want to find that video, I was saying. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about what bystanders can do. I think a lot of people have been feeling really motivated and really inspired by what they've been seeing bystanders do in Minnesota in response to the huge unconstitutional, violent, militarized ICE enforcement that's been happening there, and it's hopefully wrapping up. People feel inspired because they see people who have done a lot of things to try and support the immigrant community, and they want to know, like, what can I do? What's legal for me to do? What are some good strategies? So this is going to be a mix of law and best practices and just advice about if you see ICE enforcement happening, what are some legal and fiscal things that you can do in that way. So before I jump into either of those things, I have to say, just because it is lawful to do something does not mean that it is safe to do something. And you have to use your common sense, your situational awareness to figure out what you're comfortable with in terms of being a bystander. I don't have to tell you too much about excessive force and ICE encounters. Most ICE agents don't have a law enforcement background. They have very good training. They don't have a lot of the trainings that they do have. We're discovering through whistleblower complaints are actually unconstitutional. So it's, you really need to be thinking about, is it safe for me to engage in this situation, and what are some ways I can protect my physical safety? So that's number one. So just because you have a right to do something doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be safe to do that at any moment. So that to run around the back of my head while I talk about those things. So legally speaking, to the question that it is absolutely legal to record law enforcement activity. If you're outdoors, if you're in a public space where you're lawfully present, go ahead and pull out your phone and record. Don't do it in a suspicious way. Don't, be, swirly and hide your hands. Don't give them probable cause to think that you're doing something that could be creating a physical risk in the space. Hands up. I'm exercising my right to record law enforcement. That's something that you can say if they question you. If ICE agents ask to see your phone, you can say, I do not consent to a search of my phone. phone. You don't have to give an ICE agent your phone without a warrant. They might take it anyway. There was a story that came out actually that I have a screenshot of it in the slides about there was an incident where a teenager was in the car with his dad, and his dad was being detained by ICE. And the teenager was recording it as he had a lawful right to do so. And ICE grabbed his phone out of his hand and took it. A few days later, the teenager used Find My Phone and located his phone in a used electronics vending machine. The cops literally, like ICE, literally just sold it for money. So just because something's illegal doesn't mean ICE isn't going to do it, right? But what you should do is you should assert your rights. I do not consent to a search of my device. ICE never has the right to delete your data either. So if you take a video and they say delete that photo, delete that video, you can just go ahead and say no. They don't have the right to tell you to do that. They don't have the authority to delete your data in any circumstance, even if they did have a warrant. One tip here, we've heard from advocates and other community members that sometimes when ICE arrests somebody, they'll use their Face ID or their thumbprint ID on their phone without their consent to open somebody's phone. So it's a best practice to try and use, if you're going to be participating in bystander efforts, it's a best practice to use a numeric passcode instead. There's been a case law that says that you can't be forced to give up your passcode without a judicial warrant. There's no situation where like an ICE officer can say, unlock your phone, give me your passcode. That's not lawful. Things that you should record. So when you're recording, it's what you're trying to, in my mind, you're trying to meet two goals, right? You're trying to be helpful to that person and their loved ones, right? Like you're trying to be a good neighbor to that person, and you're also trying to create a record in case the community needs to know about unlawful and unconstitutional plays by neighboring. So those are like your two goals. So what kind of stuff do you want to be coming out in your recordings? You want, you can narrate along with what you're recording. You can say, hey, I'm here at the corner of 4th and Wellness. I'm in front of the federal courthouse. It's Wednesday, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. You know, you can go ahead and narrate that kind of information into your video. You want to be specific about where you are. You want to be specific about who you're recording. So what agency is it? Is it ICE? Is it Border Patrol? Are there local law enforcement who are there on the scene helping ICE out? That's something that happens across the country. Is ICE starts some sort of enforcement activity and then other agencies start showing up on the scene. That's really helpful information for advocates to know like what ICE's computer is in the community. How many officers were there, that kind of thing. You also are legally allowed to ask officers for their names and badge numbers. Obviously, don't do that if you think it's going to be physically risky. Don't expose yourself to unnecessary risk of violence. But you have a right to ask for that information. So if you have an opportunity and you feel safe doing that, you can go ahead and do that. You can try and get it on your video or you can write it down. You might also try and take note of how long the interaction took. And you can also try and figure out what are you looking at, what is happening. So is it a workplace raid that you're observing? Do they have a warrant? Are they looking for a specific person? Are they just stopping all around people and harassing them? That's something that's been happening, unfortunately, across the country more now. So trying to get a good sense of, is it a warrantless arrest? Do they have a warrant? Is it a worksite situation? That sort of information is really helpful for advocates who are trying to like map trends and enforcement in the community. Okay. Hopefully this is better for Zoom.
One thing that's really important to note is you should always try to focus your video on the officers and not on the person who's being detained. That's a really vulnerable moment for that person who's being arrested. And you don't necessarily know what their level of consent is to being filmed, but you absolutely have a right to film the officers and to try and catch any unconstitutional things that they might be doing. So definitely try to, as best you can, protect that person's privacy and also make sure that you're keeping your focus on the law enforcement officers. Definitely try not to record any sensitive information that might harm that person's legal case. So if you hear information about their immigration status, about their criminal history, about where they live, that kind of stuff that could be used against them, try not to record that. You can stop recording, you can try and back up so you don't hear it. Whatever you can do to try and protect that person's privacy in that moment is also really helpful. in terms of like what, okay, so you've got this video, you saw this horrible thing happen, you've got this video of it, like what do you do with that next? This is some tips just about like responsibly sharing the information that you've gathered. So number one, first and foremost, don't share videos or photos of people, especially online, especially on social media without their consent. You never know how that information is going to percolate through the community, what kind of negative repercussions that could have. And so like definitely try to make sure that if when you see these videos happening of violent ICE interactions online, often that's part of like a legal strategy that like a lawyer has vetted, that they've decided it's good to raise public awareness. But those are decisions that need to be made with like that person, their family, their loved ones who might be impacted and with their legal counsel. So don't be doing that. Absolutely do not live stream. That's probably the worst thing that happened to that person in their life, right? Like you don't want to be like live streaming that, and you don't know what's going to happen during that encounter. You don't know what kind of things could be going wrong. And for that reason, it's better just to record it, save the information, and try and connect with people afterwards to figure out what that best use of that video is. In that spirit, it's really important to back up your data as soon as you can. So as soon as you get home, make sure that you've made a copy of that file, that you've got it backed up onto your computer or to wherever you securely store your digital media. Don't edit the file though. So if you want that, for example, if you document a constitutional violation and their attorney wants to be able to use that in court, don't be changing the file name. Don't be editing that document. Don't be blurring out photos, names, or whatever, that kind of stuff. If you want to do that sort of thing, make a copy first and then edit the copy. So that's a best practice. Absolutely, something that's super important is verify before you share. How many of us here have seen a Facebook post that says ICE is at the Allsup's, and it's a picture of a Forest Service truck and 3 guys in matching uniform, like polo uniforms, and it's like super clear that that's not what that is. But somebody got really panicky because there's so much anxiety in the community right now, and I really want to validate that anxiety is 1,000% valid. It's not a place that we should be operating from when it comes to our social media behavior. So like if you have that feeling of anxiety, you're like, oh my God, I need to tell people that I saw this thing and it stressed me out. Like, let's just take a deep breath. Let's figure out what is it that we're looking at before we start posting. We've seen a couple of examples of this just recently. There was this flyer that was going around it was at banks, it was at grocery stores. It said immigration is going to be located at Lowe's and Home Depot and El Mesquite Market from February 19th to 23rd. It was super specific. Nobody in the community was able to verify it. Our colleagues at the Mexican consulate couldn't verify where this report came from. It was a blatant rumor. It's just a rumor that just stoked a lot of fear in the community that's not helpful. It disempowers people, and it creates fear and it creates panic when those kinds of rumors are elevated. And we saw it being posted online. We also saw flyers, like hard copies of it showing up in the community, and it had no basis in reality. It was just some rumor somebody heard and they just ran with it. So taking a second to verify what it is that you've recorded, what you saw, before you start posting it everywhere is something that really helps us make sure that the real information is rising to the top, right? We're not drowning it out with rumors, and it helps people not get so panicky all the time, feeling like everybody's always under assault when it's really just like some sort of other government official who's just doing their job. Let's see. All right, so transitioning back to legal rights here. You have a right to talk to people. You have a First Amendment right to talk to people who are at the scene of whatever it is that you're observing. So that can mean reminding people of their rights in the moment. It can also mean talking to the person who is being detained and trying to figure out what's the best way that you can help that person in that moment. And so if you are seeing somebody being arrested, you might, something that's helpful for you to do is help that person connect to their loved ones, because it's very important to act as quickly as possible when somebody is arrested by ICE to try and protect their legal rights and also try and protect their physical health. So like if they have medications, for example, making sure that makes it with them to detention, because there's like a period of time where that person is just going to be hard to reach because they're getting processed in. And that's the time when you really want to catch them. So if you have a moment where you can discreetly, privately talk with a person who's being arrested, ask them, do you have a loved one you'd like me to contact? If they're alone, for example, if there's nobody there who knows them at the scene, obviously. Be very careful doing this. First of all, physical safety, right? Like you don't want to be interfering with what law enforcement is doing. Second of all, the information they give you might be exposing others to risk, right? If they give you the name of an undocumented loved one, ICE could be hearing that, right? Like ICE could hear that information and run with it. So just be very careful to try and make sure that if you do approach the person who's being arrested, that you're being discreet, that you're not asking for anything extra, that you're asking them how you can help them in that moment, and that you're not like creating a situation that would increase their legal risk either. So definitely don't ask questions about their immigration status. Don't ask about their criminal history. None of that stuff is your business anyway, right? Like you're just trying to help them connect the information that you have, which is crucial, to their loved ones who need to know, right? You also have a right to remind them of their rights as a bystander. So for my First Amendment right protects my right to remind somebody, hey, you don't have to answer their questions. You don't have to consent to that search. You can remain silent. You can call a lawyer. Don't sign anything without a lawyer. You can help somebody, because in that moment, right, like Kristen's talking about, when your blood pressure goes through the roof and your heart's in your stomach and you're like all discombobulated and you're confronted with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? Sometimes there's like a ton of officers there for no reason and they've all got weapons and it's a really tense moment. Like you're, the part of your brain that remembers your constitutional rights may have left the building. So if you're a bystander, you can help somebody tap into that knowledge and remind them, hey, you have the right to remain silent. Hey, you have the right not to consent to searches. And that can be a really powerful thing a bystander can do. So in the slides, I have this slide that has key information that people should know about ICE detention. And I'm just going to run through it real quickly, but I hope that you guys are able to find this information online so you can keep it handy. Usually what happens when somebody is arrested by ICE is they get taken to the field office. Here in New Mexico, the only ICE field office we have is in Albuquerque. Sometimes they get taken to Border Patrol facilities. Sometimes they get taken to El Paso. Sometimes local cops will let them use their space for whatever reason. So that's kind of the key window to try and catch people to appeal to ICE to say, hey, for example, I'm a breastfeeding mother. I need to get home to my baby, or I have diabetes and I need my insulin injections or whatever it is. Like figuring that out before you're in a prison facility is usually like the best opportunity to do that. So acting fast is really important. And knowing the address for the ICE field office is really important because that's where your loved one is likely going to go. Within a couple of days, the online ICE detainee locator will have information. So you can look up their So if somebody doesn't make it home, heaven forbid, right? If somebody doesn't make it home and you need to figure out where they are, ICE has a website where you can look them up, but the information is probably not going to be accurate for a couple of days. So you kind of have to wait for that. People who are arrested by ICE have a right to legal counsel, but ICE detention isn't the same as criminal custody. You're not being accused of a crime, so the government will not provide an attorney to you. You're going to have to find your own attorney and pay for it on your own. We have lots of free resources in New Mexico that can support folks here. We have these flyers from the New Mexico Immigrant Law Center. They're a great resource for folks who are in this position. You also have a right to consular visits. So if you're a citizen of another country who has a consulate here in the United States, you can get somebody from your country's government to support you. And I know the Mexican consulate in Albuquerque does visits. They go and visit people in detention centers. They can help pay for lawyers for people who are detained, for Mexican citizens who are detained. They can help connect with family members. They can help get your paperwork in order if you have loved ones who want to meet you in home country, that kind of thing. So that's a really powerful resource that everybody has a right to when they're in ICE detention. And then the one thing that bystanders are not allowed to do legally is interfere with law enforcement operations. So if you try to interrupt what they're doing, if you block their car, if you position yourself in their way, if you touch them, if you verbally harass them, you could end up catching charges yourself for those kinds of things. That's illegal behavior. And the Constitution is not going to protect you. Even if you're trying to interrupt something that's unconstitutional, you don't have the right to interfere with law enforcement. So that's the only thing that you really can't do. And so you might think about things like, you do have a legal right to record, but do you have a right to record and position yourself between ICE and the person they're trying to arrest? Like at a certain point, you got to consider whether or not they've got a case that you're interfering with law enforcement. So just be mindful of that. And that's all I have to say about that.
We did have 2 questions in the chat.
I can't remember one presenting.
Oh, okay. We are going to go to the questions. One of them was, can we live stream ourselves if we are being pulled over by ICE in case we're alone?
Can you live stream yourself? Yeah, I would. I wouldn't do it, but you have a right to do that. If it's yourself, if you're not worried about giving consent to another person, I wouldn't live stream somebody else because I don't know what their preferences around that, right? But if you decide for yourself that that's how you want to handle that, you can't do that.
The next question was, how can we citizens discern who is a federal officer and who is a member of the cartel? Both cover their faces.
That's a great question. I think you have a right to ask an agent, a law enforcement agency, what agency they're with, what their name is, what their badge number is. I agree that it's a problem that ICE agents are covering their faces and they're running around looking like they're doing things that should be hidden. I think this is a reason why legislation against wearing masks has been introduced and has been contemplated in a lot of communities. But I would say the one right that you do have is to ask, what agency are they with? What's your badge number? What's your name? If you are sincerely worried that the person that you're interacting with is not law enforcement and they are a criminal or they're trying to hurt you or extort you, call 911. I would say is another thing that you can do.
We will take any questions that you all have. Anybody in the audience want to ask a question? Sure.
That question regarding you're presenting, you have 5 points, only got image point of the grace. Whatever that one was.
So, I'll just go through them again, so you have them all. So be humble, collected, using respectable terms. Remain silent and avoid any basic questions. Number 2, refuse consent to searches. Number 3, terminate the encounter as soon as possible by asking, am I being detained? Am I free to go? Is number 4. Or command number 5 asks, record the interaction in the bar poster.
Is there anywhere we can get access to that information?
Yeah, we have tons of information in the ACLU website. Also, the Mexico Liberty Law Center has great information on ICE interactions, the one to do, not to do. There's quite a bit of pamphlets and handouts in the front up there, including these very easy to read, easy to discern informationals about how and what your rights are, how to assert them, all of those things. There's also these little small things that you can carry with you when you travel. This one's specific to immigration, but there's others that are just specific to getting pulled over, getting stopped on the road. There's also a card here in Diné Pasad, the Navajo language. So it has both English and Navajo, and this one's both in English and in Spanish. So there's a wealth of information out there. Come to us if you want to know where to go for specific information. Go to the front if you want just general information that we brought with us. We're happy to share with you the PowerPoint that didn't show up so you can see it. That also has some of the tips and rules that we talked about. So anything that you need, we're here for you.
Yeah, one more question in the chat. Is whistleblowing to make noise useful?
What context?
Sure. So you do have like a First Amendment right to notify people who are around that ICE is there. So you've seen that tactic used in other communities, right, of whistleblowing. And there's certain patterns that you say like, okay, 3 is ICE is here, that sort of thing. I think if you're coordinated with folks and they know what that means, I think that can definitely be helpful. I also have, like, just as a woman, right, like I have carried a whistle in my purse for a long time, which I call my rape whistle. And so if I hear a whistle blowing, I might run toward it instead of away from it. I think it's helpful as in terms of like a community tactic, right? To have a common shared understanding of like, what does blowing the whistle mean? Does it mean come help me, or does it mean get out of here? I think it's just important to contextualize what you're doing, basically. And I think connecting with community members, talking with your neighbors, talk with the other parents at your kid's school, get involved with organizers and have kind of a shared toolkit and like shared tactics, I think is really powerful. I think whistleblowing can definitely be a powerful tactic when it's used in community with a shared understanding of what it means.
All right. Question, Dennis.
You talked about agreements that ICE or CBP has with local police departments, and we all, go into Rio Rancho, we go into Bernalillo, we go to Sante, we go to Los Luces, we just go all over. So do you know what local police departments recommend ICE? If any tribal, the police departments here in Mexico are working with ICE.
So in New Mexico today, there's only one active 287G agreement, and it's with Curry County. That's the only active one. That agreement will be illegal on May 20th when HB 9 comes into effect, which is awesome. In other, I don't off the top of my head know if you're like, in Arizona, for example, I don't know what other entities over there. I do know that they are more common in states that have Republican leadership. There are some states that require 287G agreements, so like Texas and Florida and Tennessee, I think, all require law enforcement agencies to enter those agreements. So that's important information to know. In terms of tribal entities, there aren't any in New Mexico that have entered into those agreements.
That we know of, and we know, we've talked, I think we're in conversation with tribal leadership, making sure that we understand if there's any sort of presence of ICE in those tribal communities. And so far as you just stated, we have not confirmed any substantial information if that's actually happened. Yeah, well, do you have any follow-up?
Yes, I did witness an apprehension in Albuquerque, Rio Rancho, right on the border near the mall. And we witnessed it, we taped it, we reported it. And then when we came back to look at the scene, we saw the ICE vehicles parked to the side. They had already apprehended the individual. And we also saw Rio Rancho police there. So that's why I was asking that question. So is there an informal agreement or what type of agreement, if any, with possible other locals, police departments have?
Yeah, that's a great point. You don't necessarily have to have a 287G contract to have officers who are willing to just call the ICE office up. And I did want to add on, but before I answer this question about your previous question, there's on the ICE website, there's actually a list of all, it's not usually like super up to date, but there's a list of all cooperating active 287G agreements. So if you're going somewhere and you want to see like, oh, does this place have that kind of agreement, you can look online. But in terms of, so that's another thing that we're working on, like at a policy level, is creating policies around what can law enforcement share with ICE, how can they collaborate with ICE. Like in Bernalillo County and in Albuquerque, we have really strong local policies saying that they're prohibited from that kind of thing, but that's usually sort of up to the municipality. So we can say at the state level, like you can't enter into those agreements, but in terms of dictating the policies of a police department, you kind of have to go to that entity to figure that out. So if that was APD cops, for example, that would be a violation of the Albuquerque's like city policy around cooperation with ICE. If it was Bernalillo County, that I think they have a similar policy. Rio Rancho doesn't have like any kind of like sanctuary policies. They don't have any kind of immigrant friendly policies that I'm aware of. So if it was Rio Rancho Police Department or if it was Sandoval County, odds are they wouldn't have been prohibited from doing that kind of thing, unfortunately. That's why it's really crucial for local communities to be involved in helping shape these kinds of police department policies to make sure that there's not like informal backdoors that are available to law enforcement.
Will you go back to the slide that had the address for the location for Albuquerque?
Yeah.
And then the last question that I see in the chat is, let's say a citizen did everything right and was respectful, but they're being taken. What does that individual say or do to get the attention or documentation that they need?
So, assuming we're talking about ICE detention.
Yes, if it's like, I'm assuming they're saying if it's a Native American individual, they've done everything that they can and they're still being detained. Is there anything that they can do to help get that engagement from ICE to recognize they've said they're a citizen, they said they're a tribal, but they're still being taken? What else is there potentially to do?
Yeah, so there have been at least 170 ICE arrests of U.S. citizens in the last year that we know of. So across the nation. So in terms of like the hundreds of thousands of ICE arrests that have happened, it's not a huge proportion, right? It's not a huge number of arrests, but it does happen. It does happen that sometimes you can scream until you're blue in the face. I'm a U.S. citizen. I'm a U.S. citizen, and ICE might just not care. Like they're an agency that has a poor track record of complying with the law, frankly. So what do you do then, right? What do you do then? Before you so people who are apprehended in the interior, as we say, people who are arrested out in the community, often they're able to get hearings in front of immigration judges. At a certain point in time, ICE is going to have to legally convince an immigration judge that you can be removed from the country. They're not going to be able to do that without some sort of proof that you're a citizen of some other place, right? So I think at a certain point, it's just going to come out that ICE can't figure out what country you're supposed to get deported to because you're not supposed to get deported and you're a citizen, right? So if you want to provide documentation in the moment to help fast track that along, that's like what, like what Preston's talking about, this kind of tension between you have a right to remain silent. Sometimes it's not helpful to remain silent. Sometimes it's helpful to actually provide the information that ICE needs to let you go. So if you have like your passport card, if you have your tribal ID, if you have your birth certificate, that kind of thing. I don't travel with my birth certificate on me. Like, I think that's probably a bad practice for most folks. Like, it's not necessarily safe, but that's the kind of thing that trying to get your loved ones to meet you at the field office before you get transferred. That's the kind of thing that can be really helpful to get figured out. So if you're getting arrested, if you can get your loved ones to bring your birth certificate to the field office or bring your passport to the field office or whatever proof, if you have your tribal ID, that proves that you're a U.S. citizen. I think those are the kinds of things that trying to get that information, that documentation into ICE's hands as quickly as possible can be really helpful.
Added a layer on and asked, if the person is alone and they're not able to make like a phone call, is there anything they can do internally once they're detained with ICE?
I mean, I think you are entitled to a phone call. It can sometimes be days before you get that phone call. So I think if you've chosen to waive your right to remain silent and you've informed ICE that you are a U.S. citizen and they took you anyway, at a certain point in time, you're going to get that chance to make that phone call. Calling the person who knows where your birth certificate is probably the person that you want to call in that moment. I think that I don't think there's anything that you can do besides just try and make your case to ICE that you shouldn't be detained. And just hold tight to the knowledge that like you can't be removed from the country until ICE has proven to an immigration judge that you should be removed to a specific other country, right? Like they can't just show up and be like, well, we think this person's undocumented. Like they have to actually prove like, no, they're a citizen of Guatemala, they're a citizen of Mexico, and prove that to get that person removed to that specific place. So like at a certain point in time, their case is going to fall apart and you're going to be like, get let go. It's just unfortunately sometimes it takes time to work through that process. But I would say trying to use your phone call to get your loved one to bring you your proof of citizenship to the field office is probably the fastest way to get out of that situation.
Yeah, and I'll just reiterate what I said earlier. So everything I'm sharing with you is how to assert your rights. And it's to my experience and my advice is always assert your rights. Like always do that. But there's consequences for doing so, right? And then there's consequences for waiving your rights. What we're actually saying right now is there's a middle ground where you give a little bit away just to get through the interaction. If that's what you want to do, right? If you want to just get through that scenario, that means showing a little bit of information. That means letting them know you're a U.S. citizen, which you can still let them know, I don't want to answer any questions, and I don't want to consent to searches. And in a little while, we're going to hear from Ronald about tribal identification and CID, how to go about that process. If that's something that makes you feel more secure, confident in that interaction, I would definitely advise you to go get your tribal ID. Make sure you have your your driver's license or whatever other ID that might help you show and prove in that moment that you are a U.S. citizen. That's the one quandary that the officers are trying to understand. Are you here legally, or are you removable, or are you a U.S. citizen? So giving a little to get out of that situation is not something I advise always, but in this scenario, because we want people to get home safely, we want people to travel to and from their destination without an issue, then there's that little middle ground where you just provide just enough information for them to know that you're a U.S. citizen.
The last question is, what if you have a U.S. birth certificate and New Mexico real ID, but an expired passport? Should it matter?
I don't think so. No, I don't think that should matter. I think to me, that sounds like 3 good forms of ID. One thing to know about the real ID is that it's not actually proof of citizenship. You can be a non-citizen and still get a real ID. So there's requirements for what kind of visa or what kind of immigration status you have to get a real ID, but it's by itself, it's not a proof that you're a U.S. citizen. But it should certainly be helpful to ICE to figure out that you are here lawfully. And yeah, your birth certificate, I still have my original one. I think that doesn't expire. That's a document that's evergreen. And your passport too. If you've ever had a U.S. passport, you're trying to get to what in legal jargon they call the preponderance of the evidence, which means that it's more likely than not that you're a U.S. citizen. So if you have those three things together, I would say we're way past a preponderance. We're in this is a U.S. citizen, leave this person alone territory right there. But yeah, I would say any kind of evidence that you have that makes it more likely than not that you're a U.S. citizen. And if you're in that situation, right, where you've been detained, you're in the field office, you're trying to try not to end up in a prison facility. Those are the kinds of, I would say any of those things are helpful and useful to bring.
Thank you. Thank you all for the time. Oh, one more question. Oh, sorry, let's just go next question. So let's go you and then there.
Alon maybe addressed this earlier, but there being that ICE is under Homeland Security, right? That's a federal agency. So do they have jurisdiction on our reservations, and being that it's federal? I guess that's one thing I want to get an understanding.
I think we haven't actually gotten to the point where we're sort of understanding exactly what that is, because for the most part, at least in New Mexico, the tribes have been resistant to allow that sort of presence occur. We have heard through rumblings and rumors that there's maybe some other tribes, in different states where there may have been an agreement, but it was rescinded. So right now, it's sort of in this land of rumor. We can't really confirm what's happening in terms of ISIS trying to, in terms of them trying to get onto tribal lands. And right now, it just hasn't been confirmed. So that's where we're at with that. I think if there was something to give us more information about it is occurring, let's figure that out now. That will be the next presentation, but hopefully done. I hope that answers your question. I know it's a little loose, but it's the status as of today. And then we'll go to the back clip.
What support can be had from ATP and the city and ICE strengths to detain officers?
Anybody from the city want to speak?
At this time, what we know is that because we have an ordinance in place for the way that it's stated is we don't collect demographic information for our immigration and refugee population. So what we state is that if APD is asked for that information, they don't have anything to turn over. So that is partially how they protect those individuals, is we don't collect any of that. There was a really great presentation by the Native American Rights Fund, just to go into a little bit more of the prior question. That is available online, and they do go over the rights that DHS has, as well as the different categories of authority between ICE and the different categories of law enforcement. So that's a really good presentation to refer to. All of those resources are being linked to our city website as well. So if you have additional questions, you can go back to our city website to refer to those resources. But essentially what the notion is that the tribal nations have the most rights because of their sovereignty. So what NARF is stating is that the tribes should be reaching out to DHS to establish any kind of connection to help support those conversations if they're having challenges. So really, if you are a tribal member and you're detained, your contact isn't the Mexican consulate, it's your tribal nation. So it would be Navajo Nation, it'd be your Pueblo, it'd be wherever you're from, because your tribe is the one that needs to advocate on behalf of you. So those are some of the resources that we're also trying to put together, tribal contact lists, so that if people do need those resources, they are able to reach out to them. So in this instance, the tribal sovereignty is the strongest piece that we need to lean into and encourage our own governors to access that. They can make a tribal consultation request with DHS in order to help mitigate some of these concerns that they have. So if you have any way to contact your tribal nation, we can provide that information as well for DHS. Like I said, NARF did a really great presentation a few weeks ago, and they covered a lot of this information. So there is a video online that you can also refer to that has most of this detailed. So we'll share that as well. But just to kind of come back together with those questions. And I know we've started late, so I want to give space for the rest of our presenters as we continue to move forward. If there's any additional questions for the ACLU, you're more than welcome to put them in the chat, and we can follow up and make sure that we get those answered. Our next presenter is Alicia, and she's from the 19 Pueblo District. She is going to give a presentation on their rights that they've established over at what the 19 Pueblo District is the area where Indian Pueblo Cultural Center is. That is trust land, and so it's separate from the city. So she's going to go over that as we transition. Give us just a moment. So do you want the do you want the video on? Sure. Okay. That way people can see you. Yes. Let's put this here. Okay. There you go. Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay, great. My name is Alicia Montoya, and just a little bit about me. I grew up in Albuquerque, New Mexico at the end of 12th Street. And my family, my dad's family was from Mora, New Mexico, and my mother's family was from Truchas, New Mexico. I graduated from Manoa High School, and then I graduated from the University of New Mexico with a master's in public administration. And I am the district manager and tax administrator for the 19 Pueblos district. My presentation was on amendment rights, but I'm going to approach this topic from a very unique perspective. I'm going to approach it from the 19 Pueblos district and our district policies. And you might find that interesting as reflected in your own Pueblo and nations, and we can talk about that later. But of course, I still want to share the incredible story of sovereignty of the 19 Pueblos district. And this story begins over a century ago. And it's an incredible story that is about the future of indigenous sovereignty and community resilience. And it's a story about land, and it's a story about governance, and it's a story about 19 Pueblos standing together and the reclamation of the land and the culture and their sovereign authority. And I'm very grateful to be standing here today to share this story, and I'm very grateful for the city of Albuquerque to bring this information out to everyone. And the presenters today did great detail on all your rights and everything. And I'm just going to do a bigger overview of what that means. And so the 19 Pueblos District is an example that I'm going to present today, what can be done to protect your constitutional rights. You may or may not be familiar with the 19 Pueblos District, but after my presentation, I think you will be. It's an incredibly impactful land, not only for the 19 Pueblos themselves, but also for the city of Albuquerque. In 1882, Mr. Clark deeded this land to Albuquerque, to the United States government, for the purpose of establishing an industrial school for Pueblo and other Native children. And then the president of the United States at the time, President Arthur, he issued an executive order, and that created the formal boundary of the Albuquerque Indian School. And at the peak, this campus, as you probably know, had like over 40 buildings. It had a gymnasium, a kitchen, arts and crafts, a silversmith shop. They played football. It was quite incredible. But it was a reflection of a federal commitment, but not a federal commitment towards indigenous sovereignty. The school at the beginning was known as a 4-point education plan, okay? It removed Native children from their land. It removed and banned their cultural practices. It wanted to merge them into American Anglo culture, and it enforced a military-style education. So it wasn't designed to educate Native children as Native children at the time. And even in those halls, the resilience, remained, and it kept going. And because over time, these Native students became Native educators. And as seen today at Santa Fe Indian School, now there's institutions that keep this in mind. But turning back to the Albuquerque Indian School at the time and back to the 19 Pueblos District, it wasn't until the 1960s that Pueblo leadership began pushing back. And this again, during the 1960s, they always talk about civil rights. There was a lot of Native civil rights that were going on in the time that I wasn't taught in school, but it was happening. And it was happening, and it was happening because things have changed because of it, because of that leadership. And the Pueblos recognized Albuquerque Indian School land as an opportunity, as an economic potential, and a cultural revival. So 11 acres were set aside and became the Indian Pueblo Cultural Center. And that's a great place. I'm sure many of you visited. Please come back or please visit for the first time. And then in the 1980s, the Pueblos formally petitioned the transfer of land. And it came the year the school closed. So in the 1980s, it closed. And then over 10 years, nothing happened. And the trees withered and the grass died and dust blew in. Yep. And so there was a delay in restoring Indigenous control over Indigenous land. But let me tell you something. Pueblo leadership never gives up. We know this because I've worked for them for 12 years. And if you study the culture, you understand Pueblo leadership never gives up. So in 1993, the land was formally placed into federal trust. And trust status matters. We've already talked a little bit, touched upon about, what does that mean? Your constitutional rights and everything. So trust status matters when you get that. It protects land from taxation, alienation, and of course, exploitation. And it affirms the government-to-government relations. We talked about reaching out to DHS. It is important your Pueblo governments reach out. That is a right to have that government-to-government consultation. So now going back to the 19 Pueblos district, we have the status of trust. And so then the Pueblo leadership put up the Indian Pueblo Federal Development Corporation, IPFDC. And this was going to develop and manage the land for economic benefit. So they had a very strong vision, but the structure needed strengthening. And so then in 2011, something amazing happened. It was a pivotal change brought together by Pueblo leadership and Pueblo governors, and they corrected the missteps of IPFDC. And they established checks and balances, they separated commercial activity from government authority, and hence the 19 Pueblos district was formed. And that's who I work for. This is a 70-acre plus land that sits in the middle of Albuquerque, which is the hub of New Mexico's economics. And it's on ancestral Pueblo lands too. It's not city land, it's not state land, it's tribal trust land governed by 19 Pueblos. Okay, so it's like the 21st Pueblo, sometimes they call that. It has laws, and they put laws into place and policies. And the ICE policy is one of our policies. We have land use policies, land use regulation, business registration, liquor control, business, gross receipts tax, hotel tax, gasoline tax. And of course, we work with the city through intergovernment relations for help with the fire and police and things like that as well. So we often meet with APD and BIA because this land is in the middle of Albuquerque. So it's very different from the other Pueblo communities because our population is mainly non-tribal, but it is tribal land. And the governors exercise sovereign authority there. They enact the ordinances, they establish policy, they form intergovernmental agreements, and they oversee the economic development. Okay, so that's the story. Let's turn now to the essential point and why we're all gathered here today, okay? Some people mistakenly believe that Native Americans are not U.S. citizens. That is so incorrect. They're citizens of their sovereign tribal nations, they're citizens of the United States, and they're citizens in the states in which they reside, okay? And I say this because this is recorded, this is going to go out to the public. Many of you in here are like, yeah, we know that. But a lot of people don't, and that's why I say it. And you all should continue to say that and repeat that and educate people on that. But it wasn't until 1924 when U.S. Congress passed the Indian Citizenship Act. And that was the act that granted United States citizenship to all Native Americans. It wasn't until 1924, 100 years ago. And then it wasn't until, but even though they had citizenship, a lot of states didn't allow voting. And New Mexico was one of them. They made a lot of barriers in place so Native Americans could not vote. And it wasn't until 1948 when New Mexico's Supreme Court decided in Trujillo versus Garley that Native Americans, despite of where they live, if they're on reservations, they can still vote. And I think that decision was pushed forward because during World War II, many Native American men and children, young boys, fought valiantly and died during World War II on behalf of the United States. And so finally, that was pushed forward. But it wasn't until 1962 that you really got a lot of those rights formalized for Native Americans. And so you are US citizens and you have rights under the US Constitution. And as you know, there are 27 amendments to the US Constitution. And the first 10 amendments are known as the Bill of Rights, and they were ratified way back in 1791. And I'm going to just focus on the first 5 amendments, okay, when I'm talking about this. And Mr. Sanchez and Ms. O'Sullivan, I believe his name, they did a wonderful job going into the depths of the 4th and 5th. But I'm going to kind of go high end over the first 5. And the first one, and I use hand signals to kind of help me remember. The one is the First Amendment, and it guarantees 5 fundamental freedoms. And I think sometimes we take those 5 fundamental freedoms for granted. We forget about them, that we have them. The first is freedom of religion, okay? Freedom of speech, which I'm doing right here today. The freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, all of us gather here today, and the freedom to petition. And that's just your First Amendment. Of course, we always talk about the Second Amendment, right to bear arms. The Third Amendment, you never think about this, but it says that you protect citizens from soldiers coming into your home and taking it over. And that came out of the Civil War, actually. And then the Fourth Amendment, which Mr. Sanchez talked about a lot, is against reasonable searches and seizures. So I always hold this up, Fourth Amendment. You knock on the door. No, you can't come in. That's my Fourth Amendment right. I have to say whether you can come in or not. And they give great detail about what that means, not only just your house, but your property, your car, and what that means. And it's your right. And they have to have a warrant, a judicial warrant. There's been a lot of talk and confusion about administrative warrants, but a judicial warrant is what's needed because it shows process, it shows it's been gone to the courts, and that's part of your right. And it has to be very specific to describe the place to be searched and the items to be seized. So that's a very important right that we have. And they described that very wonderfully in the prior presentation. And of course, your Fifth Amendment, the right to remain silent. But there's also other parts of the Fifth Amendment that are important. The right to due process of law, which has been overlooked, it seems, lately. The protection against self-incrimination, again, right to remain silent. Protection against double jeopardy. You can't be tried twice for the same crime, right? And the protection of grand jury for serious federal crimes. And a protection against the government taking your property and not compensating you. So it's interesting, there's so many things they thought of and all these different rights. And we all have those rights. Now remember, when these were ratified in 1791, Native Americans were not considered US citizens. They were not considered US citizens until 1924, but you are US citizens. And the federal and state barriers to Native voting and civic participation were largely dismantled in the 1960s, but it's very important to have these meetings, for me to get up here and say things that you think like, oh, yeah, we know that. But to continue to perpetuate that information and that communication so that we do not go backwards again. So again, I can't stress this enough, citizens, Native Americans are citizens of their tribal nations, of the United States, and of the states they reside. So as far as the district, of course, we put into place a policy because we're a very interesting piece of land, like I just said. We're federal trust land. We're in the middle of Albuquerque. People don't realize when they're walking through there, they're suddenly on federal trust land. We have the security department there. We work with BIA. That's our first, they have the jurisdiction there. But we also have an agreement with APD. They come and they work with us. And we certainly have, we have officers now who have been appointed to be federal jurisdiction. And it's an agreement we have with them. So jurisdiction matters. Now, our district ICE policy rests on 2 foundations, and I've talked about that a lot already, your tribal sovereign authority and your constitutional amendment rights. Our policy instructs that only designated entity representatives may speak with ICE or any federal enforcement official. So we've asked all our businesses, and we're reaching out to Pueblos to tell them to designate a particular person who, if an ICE agent comes on and is asking a lot of questions, that person is called. And so that you have someone there who is an expert in understanding what's happening. We also have them designate private and public areas very clearly to be marked, and access is restricted. And there's also restrictions, on different things like, photography or auto recording and things like that. Because it's interesting, at the 19 Pueblos District, we have a lot of open places. We're a business. We have galleries, we have restaurants, we have bars, and yet it's federal trust land. And we have Native American employees there, quite a bit, and people who come and visit. So there are a lot of public areas that ICE and anyone else can come to. But then we have restricted areas as well. And we really emphasize putting up those signage and understanding what those restricted areas are. And usually they're employee offices, kitchens, storage areas, hotel rooms, record-keeping offices. Can't just go into your HR department and start looking through your files. It's not allowed. And so we put these into place. We're not obstructing justice by doing this. We are doing lawful governance based on who we are as a Indian trust land. And this is just like for any business, any university that you have, any hospital, any corporation also has these rights, of course. And of course, that's your tribal government offices. And we are reaching out, and I really want to thank the city for compiling all this information on the website, getting this information out. They talked about NAF, and that's really great. There's so many resources out there. I'm giving a very big overview of it, but I highly encourage you to go out and talk to experts in this field and talk to these agencies, and they will direct you. And again, to tell you, ICE may enter public areas, lobbies, restaurants. We had a hotel manager saying, well, we don't want to cause a problem. You know, the ICE agent comes in to rent a hotel room or have coffee. Well, of course, it's too. But they can't go in restricted areas without a judicial warrant. And it's good to understand, you know, what that means and what those look like. But we also talk about what happens in our policy if an interaction occurs. And there's been a lot of talk about that, which has been very helpful and very valuable. And I'm so glad this is being recorded so that you can go back and refer to that. And again, I'm kind of just repeating a very high level. Mr. Sanchez went through the details of what to do, and Ms. O'Sullivan, they were very good. Document the interaction. They said that your phone is a very powerful tool you have. Identify officers. What is your name? What's your serial badge? Who are you? You can ask those questions. Notify leadership. Leadership, your designated representative at the district, they would notify me. You know, to notify that you're not alone, to communicate, to have those areas of communication open, and then continue to share that. Now, if there's in our policy, if these incidents continue, we get more than one, things are escalating, then of course, we're going to notify our congressional delegation. We're going to notify tribal leadership. We're going to notify state and city officials. And we're going to maintain records for accountability. It's very important to do that and not to alter those records. Because if it goes to the court of law, the judge is going to look at it and say, well, you altered this. No, you need to keep consistent, unaltered records to reflect what happened. It's very important. It's always about protecting yourself. Our goal, of course, is not to eliminate federal authority. It is to work together. And we want to have those interactions occur lawfully and respectfully, very much about respect in all these instances, and through proper channels. It protects employees, it protects guests, it protects the due process, it protects your due process, and it protects your constitutional rights. And so that's what the policy we have is aimed for, to do that, to answer these questions that were brought up, these concerns. You want to put that framework in place that we know what to refer to where our rights are as U.S. citizens, as tribal members that are sitting here before me today. And it's very important to have your state ID, like they're saying. It's great that the Pueblos and Navajo Nation are creating access so that you can get your tribal identifications as well. You have to be careful though, because a lot of these ICE agents, what do they know about tribal? No, not much. It's kind of surprising how much people don't know, actually. It's disappointing. And so you want to have that state identification as well. And you want to protect yourself and have that in place. So I'm very thankful that that's an access that your governments are moving forward and getting that out for you. It's just really important to understand that. And of course, in your own communities, it's going to be very different than what happens on the district. I don't speak for anyone else except my policy on the district that's been vetted through our legal counsel and approved by my 19 governors who are my bosses, basically. And so what happens in your own tribal governments, you need to go and talk to your governors, your leadership, your agencies, and get that information needed so you know what to do and you have that contact. And we'll continue reaching out to the Pueblos because that's part of what we do as public servants of the 19 Pueblos. But our key message at the district, which I think I've already heard echoed here, is do not escalate the situation. Do not. When you observe, don't escalate it. Don't interfere as you observe what's happening. Keep yourself safe, keep everything safe as you can. And then always ask, I think that's very important, am I being detained? It's your right to ask that. Am I being detained? No? Then you leave. You have that right. Never forget you have those rights. And I thought it was great how they brought up, there's consequences either way, how you decide to do that, but you do have your rights. And so our goal is to prevent panic and avoid making situations worse. So just to summarize, I really, kind of a selfish thing, I came up here and I'm like, I get to talk about the district as well, and it's a great example of what's happening, unfortunately, but in unfortunate instances, sometimes great things occur. Great changes are made, as we've seen happen in our history. And so in the 1880s, the district land was used to enforce assimilation. In the 60s, the Pueblos took over the education and changed it for the better. The school closed, but then in the 90s, we saw economic development happen, and that gives back to the 19. And so now it's a cultural center, it's hotels, it's an economic developer, and most importantly for me, it's a functioning inter-Pueblo government that does government-to-government relations, that spreads information and assists as public service. So the transformation really has been profound, and the 19 Pueblos district is an example of that. And so this is just kind of a jumping off point to talk about what's happening now with this ICE activity throughout the country, which is very unfortunate. So the 19 Pueblos district demonstrates that tribes can govern impartially, they can build thriving economies, they can protect your civil rights, they can act in thoughtful policy. They can partner with cities and states and retain sovereignty. And it shows that history does not have to be hardship, and it can evolve into strength. And so it's your constitutional citizenship that we're talking about here and your sovereign authority. So I'm very grateful to be able to stand here and talk about that today. Thank you so much for your time. Okay.
Yeah.
Everyone, it is a pleasure to see you today at this event. First of all, I want to thank the Navajo Nation Civil Rights Commission, and as well as Terry Sloan and Brandy Amy from the Office of Native American Affairs. Thank you so much. I work as the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs at the City of Albuquerque for about 5 years, and all during this period of time, I have been constantly working with Know Your Rights since day one, because one of the communities who experiences many of these situations is not only the immigrant and refugee community, but many underserved communities. Okay, so why I'm here? We have many things in common. Just in the period of time,
Many centuries ago, and I'm glad Miss Alicia mentioned some part of the history, because that make us reflect on what happened in the past and the present, and how we can avoid certain things in the future. Since immemorial times, the people from where I'm from South America, went back and forth from the Incas to the Hopis, going back and forth with trade. We were brothers and sisters, and we still are. That migration was constant, and it happened for centuries, and it still happens today, just that the regulations have changed. Thank you so much. So as a result of that migration, many federal policies have changed. Many of the individuals who came to this country came for situations similar to what many our community members have experienced here locally. For example, the displacement. They have been displaced, they have been for political reasons, for weather. They have also been displaced for many other circumstances that were not positive to their communities. So when we go back to what this office does, the Office of Immigrants and Refugees, we also have some resolutions that it says that go directly to help the immigrant community, but at the end of the day, it helps everyone. For example, what Brandy was mentioning about the city of Albuquerque not asking for demographic data, there is a reason for that. It gives you the privacy and that animosity for you to be able to access services at any period of time. And many of these policies have been crucial and very important for our communities in general. And as a result of that, the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs has been also instrumental not only in helping immigrants to be able to be successful, but to be able to oversee the part of language access, for example. Our department, the Office of Equity and Inclusion, and specifically also my office in collaboration with our Native American Affairs, Black Community Engagement, Asian Pacific Islander, and the Civil Rights Office, we want to be sure that language is not a barrier for community members. I know that in some cases, that becomes a situation of being able to understand or identify what language the people speak. So we have developed partnerships and technical assistance with multiple city departments for that to happen. For example, and I know most community members will probably have it already, but we have some red cards in English and Spanish in Navajo here present in our table in the Office of Equity and in the table in the Office of Equity and Inclusion. But do you want from other languages? We can be able to produce those. We also have been resource for community engagement, and because we work in partnership, we know the importance of being able to identify the needs and the wants of our communities and being able to address them every time that is possible. And if we go back to what I was mentioning of what we have in common, the shared experiences and struggles immigrant and Native Americans have in common, we have something called Americanization. Many times when immigrants come here to the US, have similar situations of what happened to the Native American community, where the language was being restricted. At the same time, things that are connected with assimilation of the culture that is mostly Anglo. So our communities that immigrant refugees also experience that and continuously being experiencing that. We have institutional barriers, and these institutional barriers in both communities often face systemic discrimination and hurdles in accessing education, healthcare, and employment. This is a reality that continues to happen. The cross-border identities. For many indigenous peoples from Latin America, migration is to the US is the latest chapter. We have, like I mentioned at the beginning, I myself, I have indigenous roots because we have it in all Latin America and here in North America as well. So we have more in common than we can think of. Recently, there was an executive order that passed. It was for strengthening the immigrant-friendly city resolution. Why this is matter? It's not going to apply only to immigrants. This applies to anyone in the community, including Native Americans, in the sense that if you have an encounter with ICE, you have the right to due process. That's something that was mentioned by ACLU lawyers before. And the city of Albuquerque is committed in being able to ask the federal agencies for information so the due process happens. There is also an implementation and oversight for this executive order to happen. And the Office of Equity and Inclusion is responsible for the implementation of this executive order, which also asks for transparency of the city services for this purpose, and empowering and helping families
So if they have certain needs, those needs will be addressed. There are protections to children and families who are, for example, who are mixed status. In many occasions or families, you can have one member that is American citizen, another one who is resident, and another one who is undocumented. This happens very often in New Mexico. It's being said that about 110,000 people are mixed status families in the state of New Mexico. So this executive order is going to be crucial for helping our families. And I also want to invite you to the following. Last year, we have 12 webinars with amazing information that you can take in your own time. I invite you to check those webinars who are recording in English and in Spanish on our website. You see this flyer over here? It has a QR code. You can access all those webinars who have been recorded for healthcare providers, for faith leaders, for businesses. Because what Ms. Alisa, for example, was mentioning about businesses, we all can have businesses and we want to know what is private, what is public. This is the moment to get more of what is has been already taken into consideration by multiple partners and lawyers who gave us that information in those webinars. So in the near future, you have some time, please check those. But also, I want to invite you to the Know Your Rights series. These are 3 more webinars. And these ones are a little bit different than last year, because this year, a lot of people are asking where we can get legal observer training. So on the 18th of February, we have one webinar where we provided that information, not the training, but the information where you can get it. We also have the Turkey Police Department saying tips for safe protesting. Sometimes our community members want to protest in a way that it feels safe, just in case they have ice in town. We also have something about emergency preparedness and many more. So please check it out when the recordings are online. And next Wednesday, guess what? Recently, there was a statewide impact how new 2026 legislation affect our communities. 3 big bills that are going to protect our communities just passed. One that is called SB 9 clause that was mentioned before by that it will take and strip away the possibility for law enforcement to take the possibility to be to take ICE responsibilities or duties. And then there is another one for the opening of the Office of New Americans. And the last one is to don't read the plate readers, which is going to be very crucial for people coming from other states to New Mexico. So, and in March 18, and that is going to be probably also very interesting for the people who ask about public versus private spaces. Bernalillo County is developing, actually, they already approved an ordinance and a resolution connected with this purpose, and they're going to be able to give some type of review or information that or how that implementation is going to take place. Plus, we're going to be doing some updates to the executive order that I just mentioned before. So just be prepared. And overall, just know that together we can really make things even better. Like it was mentioned, in every moment of the difficulty, we have a moment of innovation, and we can make things much better. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Beatrice. She's a great asset to us here at the city and has been such a huge support when it comes to putting on these Know Your Rights. So I just thank her so much for all of her guidance that she's offered us throughout this time that we're trying to establish all of this information for the city. So the next presentation we have is with the Tribal Identification and CIB, Ronald Duncan from the Navajo Office of Vital Records. Did you want to share from your, okay, let me just give you permission. Okay. Well, if your screen's up, I'll just add you as a presenter and you can do that from your screen. Give me just a second.
You can share your screen now. And I'm going to move the mic over to but and stop how it works.
In the video too, right?
Yeah, if you'd like to show your face.
Okay. Oh, okay. Actually, I want to see my face. So, let's see. Union. Okay, can you see it?
I can't. No.
Okay, great.
I want to go back to the Zoom.
Okay.
And then once you're in the Zoom, go down here and hit share. And then select your presentation.
Okay.
Is it this one?
No.
No.
Right here.
That one.
Got it.
Go.
All right.
And then hit share.
All right. Very good. It is.
Okay.
Okay. How's it looking? Okay. This is in the way. Good. Okay, we just go how it is, how it's looking right now. Yate, everyone. My name is Ron Duncan. I'm Toratini Morfrikin Lachini. I'm and I'm Taba Dashiche Hoto Dishanellen, and I've been the program manager for the Office of Vital Records and Identification for about 7 years now. And in that time, we've been providing certificate of Indian blood and what we call the CIBs, marriage licenses, and things like that. And my presentation's more focused on what we do as a program, okay? But I know that we've been pretty busy in terms of what's been happening with ICE and things like that, okay? And but with these opportunities, we wanted to make sure that people understand what our program does, okay? And then we'll go into the context of what's happening with ICE enforcement and things like that. And some back history, we've done presentations like this before, and particularly with the Human Rights Commission and here in Albuquerque and also back at home. But in any case, it's always good to present our information about what we do. And I understand that the people in the audience here won't be able to see the slides, but the information are the provisions that we follow, the guidelines that we do follow are under the Navajo Nation Code under Title 9 and Titles 1 and Title 9. Title 1 basically is about how do you set up the tribal government. Title 9 is mainly geared toward marriage and things of that nature. We're a Public Laws 93-638 program, meaning that this used to be a Bureau of Indian Affairs function. And Navajo Nation back in 1982 said that we can do that function. We can enumerate and find out who our tribal members are. We do the enrollment. We'll take the federal monies that you used to do that they used to use to do the enrollment, and the Navajo Nation will do that. So we've been doing that for more than 40 years now as a 638 contract, okay? And as is the case for contracts, there is a scope of work, meaning that, okay, Navajo Nation, you can do these things, but here's how you're going to do it. Some of the things that are important when you do the enrollment process. Okay, going back to the code, that can be found within Title 1, Section 701. Talk about membership, the first, and you can actually find this online as well. But all persons of Navajo blood whose appears on the rolls of the Navajo Nation maintained by the Bureau of Indian Affairs are eligible for enrollment. And any person who has at least 1/4 degree Navajo blood who hasn't been previously enrolled, has been enrolled as a member of Navajo Nation is eligible for membership. And that's where we get the blood quantum That's where we get the quantum as a measure of enrollment eligibility. Number 3 talks about children born to any enrolled member or automatic members of Navajo Nation. That's more of a historical thing. When the transition happened between back in 1953 of the official roles from then into Navajo Nation, they didn't want to redo the base roll back then. So anybody who was born to enrolled members were automatically enrolled at that time. The code further speaks about dual membership. That's not allowed. You have to be either with one tribe, be Navajo Nation, and that's it. Okay. And 751 just speaks about the enrollment process. Applications do have to be notarized. Should your membership be denied, your membership application be denied, you do have an administrative process as an appellate to appeal your decision to the Enrollment Screening Committee. Now, I spoke about the scope of work. And again, since we are a 638 contract, we compile tribal membership enrollment information. We're supposed to automate our processes, provide over-the-counter services, provide tribal identification cards, and merge licenses, record changes to family status. That's when you get married, divorced, or when someone passes. We are maintaining the BIA census rules from 1940. Okay, we add, delete people, and provide enrollment information as needed. Now, as far as the enrollment process, people provide us an application and we review it and we ask for documentation, okay? We do ask for original documentation, including birth certificates and any other information that is pertinent for the enrollment. And we have to maintain, or we have to ensure that people are eligible to put quantum and make sure they're not enrolled with someone else. And that's the basically the gist of that section. Now, in terms of the tribal platforms, the tribal identification cards, okay. Navajo Nation just recently adopted a new enrollment database called Tribal Platforms. And the idea with that is that we're trying to be more efficient in how we do the enrollment process. Normally, when you come to our office, we get the paper application, okay? And it's been like that forever, okay? And we've had another database in the meantime, but the thing is that it's kind of limited in what it can do. And it's, to actually take full advantage of that program, you really have to know a little bit about the coding, stuff like that, in order to really come out with a robust report. Now, with Tribal Platforms, though, it's something that has a lot of potential, okay? And again, we're trying to figure out who's Navajo and who it should be on the rolls. And so in that sense, we're trying to modernize how we take in information and retrieve information. And this is something that we just started back in August of last year. We went live with that, and that has happened very well, actually. Other tribal programs, particularly finance and personnel, they have their version of what they're doing with these software. They're still trying to go live, but we've been doing this since August, and it's happened very well. Now, in terms of the tribal IDs itself, we do have current policies, procedures. If you do have a tribal identification card, you know that it only lasts 4 years, and that decision was made some time ago. Ideally, everyone should have a tribal identification card. They were first introduced 12 years ago, and the thing is that it hasn't really happened. And cumulatively, we've only done maybe 8,000, okay? And there's 425,000 tribal members now, okay? And looking at our stats through Tribal Platforms, we're averaging 150 tribal identification cards a month. Okay, and we're also doing 1,500, the green CIBs a month. So, and 150 tribal IDs per month isn't going to cut it. So we have to be a bit more
We have to take advantage of technology in order to roll this out. We do want, like I said, I want to stress that we do want to have people with their travel IDs. In our instance, my staff, they're giving out green pieces of paper every day. Like I said, 1,500 a month. I could redirect them. And if I give you a travel ID and make it last 10, 12 years, we don't need to see you for 10, 12 years unless you have a life-changing event, married, divorced, something of that nature, recording of your children, things like that. You let us know. So I can redirect their time instead of having them give out green pieces of paper. We can do family updates. Now we do have a backlog, a significant backlog of family updates that need to be done. Sometimes people call and say, I gave you my divorce paper about a year or so ago, but you still have my married name on my CIB. Well, we just haven't got to it. And because we are so busy doing the counter stuff, here's your CIB, that we just don't have time to do that. So in that sense, with this new travel platforms, with the software, we want to take advantage and have people self-serve, okay? And what I mean by that is that we have customers other than travel members, like the scholarship office. And what happens is that they also ask us for our to document who's a travel member or not, if they're eligible for a scholarship, okay? We want to allow access to them. If you want to know who's a travel member, here, look it up yourself, okay? And that relieves my staff from producing a green CIB for the folks who are requesting for a scholarship. Same thing with other travel programs, social services, things like that, just to make it easier, okay, for people to do that. So that's the intent of what we want to do. But in regard to ICE activities and things like that, I know there's been the question of how do we verify travel membership when people are being detained? And, honestly, I think that discussion still needs to happen because I think one of the questions that someone had asked, so which travel office do we refer people to? And I don't know if we have a definitive answer on that. If it's going to be the Human Rights Commission, this can be Operation Rainbow Bridge, it's going to be Vital Records, President's Office, I don't know. And so we need to actually have that clarified. And but in terms of our office, we do have that information of who are travel members or not. Now, our challenge in talking about things that we need to do in the future is that we need to build upon our enrollment database. Okay, a lot of our information is on paper. Okay, and we need to get that information into our enrollment database to make it more robust, more functional, more efficient, so we can have information out quicker. Okay, the big challenge with 425,000 travel members. Okay. And but for the most part, we have most people in, but we still need to provide the finer details when people have passed, when people get married, when kids are born, things like that. And we need to have that into our database. Okay. Now, I know this question has come up about travel identification cards. When you apply for a travel identification card, we tell you once you get one, you can no longer receive a green CIB. And that's the reason why we're doing that is because if you take a look at our CIB right now, you can easily forge that and create counterfeits. And that's where this whole effort first began with travel IDs. Border Patrol in the Tucson section let us know that there are people crossing with forged CIDs. Okay, and that is an issue. So having a travel ID with your photo and with your pertinent information, that stops that, or at least makes a big dent in that. So that's why we're trying to transition into the travel identification cards with the new software. Again, we just want to make sure that we move forward, and we're testing kiosks within our agency offices. There's a long line of people that are there asking, requesting for services, we can have people self-serve and enter their information. So our staff doesn't have to do that. So it's a little game that we're trying to try to have people do in order to serve more people with a little bit of funding that we do have. Eventually, this will be the basis for something, and this is long-term, having something done online. That would be a true, my biggest goal is having our services online, because it does kill me when people have to come in from Salt Lake City to get vital record services. And we have that potential, but we have to build our capacity and the foundation with the enrollment database to do that. Another thing, it's something small, but anyway, relocate to the Department of Health. We do have a lot of information, and it'd be nice to have someone look at that information, connect the dots and things like that. To some extent, people ask us to do that. We try our best, but we really should give it to someone within the health department, because that's where the epidemiology office is located. And with that, that's really what I have right now. And I know, for the sake of time, I just want to give you just a basic information or basic foundation of what our office is about, because I kind of envision there's a lot of questions about our offices. So, and I'll go ahead and stand for any questions.
One minute back. If we're talking about the IDPs that have where it's designated Native American, like Arizona driver's license, we have for federal ID, federal ID versus application ID versus the city ID. And I understand, of course, that the CIA is a federal document, and yet we have to choose one or the other. But what if I go the employer and screw, for Indian enterprise, I need to short CID, and so that automatically going to be changed to accept the activity address as well.
Alrighty, as far as Indian preference, okay, and I think there's actually a different form for that. It's called a BIA form 4432. And we also complete that on behalf of clients. Okay, so we've had instances where people have asked for Indian preference, and they submitted their CIDs, either the green paper or even the travel ID. But IHS, BIA, they still insist on having that BIA form provided to them, and we fill that out for them on their behalf. So in that sense, there's another mechanism for that. Okay, and but we still provide either CIB or the travel identification cards for other purposes. But for federal employment preference, they do the 4432. Yeah.
Yes, similar with the question that I wanted to know, if we do get a tribal identification card with CIB paper, how many years does that? Do we have so it expires and then is it an automatic renewal, or is it that?
I'm good. Our current situation is that the tribal identification cards, they only last 4 years. And again, that was, 4 years. Okay. And originally, my understanding is that when they were first proposed, it must have been something for a longer duration, but for whatever reason, I got cut down to 4. Now, again, going back to the tribal platform and the new software, first things first, get that in place and then kind of build on that, because I do want to have it last a lot longer. Okay. And because it's an opportunity for us to refocus back on what we should be doing. Okay. And again, my opinion, my staff are just doing busy work, giving out big pieces of paper. And it's like, here, just take this. We'll see you in 10, 12 years, and we'll take your divorce papers, your marriage license, the record of your child's birth. Let's update your family records, because once And I'll tell you this, I mean, we're taking appointments for travel identification cards, okay? And the thing is, the people who tend to, the people who are making the most requests for travel identification cards live off reservation. And unfortunately, because of distance or whatever, those records haven't been updated. Okay, people who live in, because of relocation and that type of situation, like people who live in Chicago, they don't provide or let our office know that someone had passed or they had a child, things like that. So if they wanted a travel identification card, we asked that. What life-changing events that have you had that we should know of, so we update your records. One part of our scope of work is that we maintain accurate records, and that includes the family situation, the spelling of names, things like that. And that's why we insist on doing that, partly because it is part of our scope of work, but also because we're laying down the foundation of the work for people who are going to be working in our office 20 years from now. And I say that because we go back and see the work that was done 20 years ago from that staff back then. There's a lot of mistakes. And so we're trying to capture this information. And one of these days, and I'm just conjecturing here, navigation may go linear instead of doing but quantum. That's going to take a lot of research. And that's why we ask all this information, because we're laying down that foundation, because the people who are going to be working vital records 20 years from now, and should, again, we go linear, they'll have the best information. Because we're kind of hampered by some poor work done in the past, okay, that we inherited and then we have to fix. And sometimes these situations are such where we can't ask anyone anymore because people are gone. So, sure.
Are there any other questions here in the room or online? Looks like we do have one. What do we have to do as other tribal enrollment departments from other Pueblo receive copies of Navajo Nation member CIB for blood quantum purposes?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
What do we have to do as other tribal enrollment departments from the Pueblos receive copies of Navajo Nation member CIBs for blood quantum purposes? So it sounds like they're getting sent to the wrong office maybe.
It might be, it sounds like it's a case where sometimes when someone's applying another tribe and receive an application for the membership into their tribe, sometimes they need to verify whether they are already enrolled with us, because they may have dual membership restrictions as well, or some type of verification within their health system that they are a tribal member for either healthcare or the scholarship. But normally, if there is another tribal enrollment office asking for information about asking us to verify tribal membership with the Navajo Nation, that's actually part of our scope of work. And should Pueblo ask for that information, they fax us, email us a letter, and we comply with that.
Okay, so then from here, I guess the best thing, if anybody's encountering this and they're receiving documents for Navajo tribal members, they should reach out to Navajo Vital Records and let them know that they're receiving these documents, or what would you suggest?
Well, if the concern is that they don't want to have us respond back to the Pueblo, that's one thing. But it's a legitimate reason by the Pueblo because they are providing health services, and we'll comply with that.
Let's see. We had one question come in earlier, but I think it was when ACLU was still here. I'll state it out loud, but I think what I'll also say is to reference NARF. But the question was, can you talk about the similarities and differences between how tribal police operate and how ICE operates? I'm thinking specifically about what I've heard, that ICE folks are more likely to come from out of our communities, out of New Mexico, and so they do not know or have relationship with locals, nor the understanding of Native communities. And for that, like I said, NARF has their presentation where they outline specifically all of the different law enforcement and their jurisdictions. So they go into that in more detail, and I would refer to them because they have the best resources on that. So I did put that in the chat.
up above some of the comments before we took the break. So that video is available on YouTube and it's accessible at any time. I believe it's around the 30-minute to 45-minute mark that they start to cover that. But that would be my best reference for that because they do talk about the relationship that they have with DHS as well as what that looks like for tribal communities. Terry, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
I was going to provide some closing remarks after we're done.
Okay. No, I was just going to set up questions around ICE and tribal police, how they interact differently. But like I said, I'd refer to them in our presentation because they covered that more in depth.
Yeah, as far as I know, the tribes are working to develop protocols now. I know, and they're probably looking towards APD and how APD is not, they're assisting, but they're not, when they do come in contact, they're not recording tribal information, or individual information. So that way, we won't have that information should I ask for that.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for being patient with us online and for staying present. For those that are here also in person, I appreciate your attendance in this day as it's been quite long. I know a 4-hour or 3 or 4 hour session can be hard to sit through, but.
Actually, I'm not really done. Well, alrighty, I do want to make a distinction now. Okay, because I'm talking about tribal identification cards as we are doing it right now. One thing I haven't talked about though is the enhanced tribal identification cards. Okay, and the difference is that, the tribal identification cards, they're essentially passport cards. And that's actually within our scope of work too, in terms that if you have an enhanced tribal identification card, you can use it for passage into Canada and in Mexico. We can't use it as like a true passport going to Europe and other places like that. But that's one thing we don't offer yet. Okay. We are in discussion of how that would work. And we are actually talking to a tribe that does that already on behalf of other tribes. But first things first, we do need to get together and make sure the information that we collect within our enrollment database is accurate. Okay, because that's going to be the basis of how we can produce an enhanced tribal identification card. Okay. If anything, everyone needs to update their records. Okay. We do need assistance, and what we do, we just got our funding today. I just looking at emails today, and we finally got our funding today for FY 2026, and we are February 25th, and we've been waiting for this. And people have been asking us do more presentations out there, but and we're kind of strapped for funding, and we got $1 million today, which is great. We do need it because we need to start planning for this year, but we also got $1 million back in 2003. And so, it's not adjusted for inflation, but we're trying to do more with less. And of course, that's how it is with a lot of travel programs throughout the country. But we're a very good example of that. People are asking us to do things here in Albuquerque, but it's like we finally got in our travel budget today, and we're supposed to cover not only Navajo Nation, but also requests for off reservation. And, if anything, we do need that resource, some funding, hire staff. I contacted Cherokee a few weeks ago. Their membership's about 460,000, and they've got almost 50 staff. We've got 425,000 tribal members, and I've only got 23 staff. And then, and we're trying our best with what we have. So.
Thank you for that. Are you good now? Okay, perfect. I don't want to shift it to anything, but yes, go ahead. Thank you guys. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Terry to give the closing remarks. Don't forget to turn the mic on.
Thank you, Brandy. Wonderful job today. Shout out to, we have our
Office of Equity and Inclusion Co-Deputy Director, Dr. Nina Cooper is in the audience today also. If there's any dignitaries or tribal leaders, please stand up so we can give you a round of applause. Really here. And Nora's Vice President out of Doha today. Thank you for being here tonight. Now, I think by now you should know the underlying theme here today is human rights. And that's something we all have, and that is something that we should all support and fight for in our lives, especially today, where we're seeing unraveling in our country. And so it is more important now than ever that we really stand up for our human rights. And for that, I'd also like to read from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 3. Everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person. Article 5. No one shall be subject to torture or to cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. Article 6. Everyone has the right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law. Article 9. No one shall be subjected to arbitrary arrest, detention, or exile. In Article 1, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in the spirit of brotherhood. And finally, from the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, Article 1. Indigenous peoples have the rights to full enjoyment as a collective or as individuals of all human rights and fundamental freedoms as recognized in the Charter of the United Nations, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and international human rights law. So I think, again, let's work together. We saw here today a gathering and combining of thoughts and ideas and groups. We've had wonderful presentations today of information. I recommend you, when we have everything ready on our website, go check out our city's Office of Native American Affairs website on our Noe Rights page. We'll have a bunch of information posted on the NARF recording also, but also the recording of this event. So I share with everybody. I think this is information everybody should hear. I think together as a collective, it's unfortunate we have to be in this position, but we can stand together and support each other, support your brother, or sister, your neighbors, and everybody together. We can help support, and we won't run into issues. We won't run into trouble, and stand strong as who we are as Native Indigenous peoples also, and Americans in this country too, and human beings in this world. We need to stand strong, and so that's what I want to close with. I'd like to thank the Navajo Nation Rights Commission for being here also, and our presenters from ACLU. Thank you.